Welcome back. The Baltimore Washington Rapid Rail proposes building a, let me get this right, superconducting magnetic levitation train system, known as a maglev train, to be able to go from Baltimore to DC in 15 minutes. That's 300 miles per hour. And it would only cost $5 billion to build. Now, Phil, I'm dying to ask you this question because I know you're a train aficionado. What is a maglev train, and would it make sense for Maryland?
Well, thanks, Mark. So maglevs are actually pretty simple in terms of technology. Just take two opposing magnets and you can see how they can hover on top of each other. That's pretty much what a maglev does. And then it just moves forward and backward on that kind of, magnetic field, for lack of a better phrase. It's a very innovative technology. Some test systems have been built in China, in Japan, and other places. It's been very well discussed in the United States for years. In fact, one of the people that worked with me on one of my railroad projects before he passed away, he was actually working on doing just such a system between Baltimore and Washington. So it's something that was, and he's the guy that founded the auto train. So certainly very innovative and something that, would be very exciting to see. As far as would it work in this area, it is a good question. I don't think yet the market is entirely there, partly because the way that trains are the most effective is when you have an opportunity for a number of intermediate stops. 15 minutes between Baltimore and Washington is great, but if you even drive I-95, you notice while there's a lot of traffic jam closer to the Washington section, as you get closer to Baltimore, it thins out. That means that a lot of your end-to-end traffic isn't really there. Now, as time goes on, this could be the harbinger that creates that end-to-end traffic by having more people moving toward the Baltimore area. And while I haven't seen the studies for that, that will be what determines whether or not this makes sense. But on the whole, it's great to see that it's being discussed.
Cynthia, there's been community opposition to the maglev train in Prince George's County, and transportation officials have come out against it. So what's wrong with it? What's the source of the opposition?
Well, there are several sources of opposition. There are a lot of federal properties that would be disturbed. There are also some natural resources that would be disturbed. There are communities that would be disturbed by the construction. And as Phil pointed up, Prince George's wouldn't benefit much from the maglev because they're not planning for intermediate stops for Prince Georgians. The three stops are DC, BWI, and Baltimore would be the stops, but not much benefit for Prince Georgians. And the county council voted against it as well. Amtrak is also not so happy about this because it is competition for Amtrak. And Amtrak says, well, the Excella gets you there in 30 minutes to New York, between Baltimore and New York, and this is 15. So, the cost benefit. So those are some of the questions and the hesitations and opposition positions that are coming from Prince George's.
Now, Phil, as I understand it, part of the issue to get to 300 miles is to have a brand new right-of-way. In other words, it's got to be straighter and I guess, obviously there's been a rail between Baltimore and Washington for a long time, but it does have some twists and turn to it. How realistic is it that you can construct something like that in as a densely populated area as the Washington-Baltimore area?
Yeah, I think it is realistic because you do have a couple of options. One could follow some of the highways like your I-95 and the BW Parkway. The other could be a little bit further inland, although the question is how much further inland would you go? Most difficult would be the Montgomery County area, where exactly you would go through. Now, depending on to what extent, how robust this would be, the amount of right-of-way you would need is actually not all that big. And the one benefit that you do have over traditional rail, which of course I love my traditional rail, but is that there's a lot less noise. So, there'll be fewer people complaining about locomotive idling or anything that normally goes into trains. And also, I doubt they'll be blowing a horn since no public crossings either.
Talking about building more infrastructure has been the rage this year. So why not spend money on an imaginative project like that? Phil, Cynthia, any thoughts on that?
Well, it's $13.8 billion, which is the current projected cost, and $5 million has been put forward for it. So it's a lot of money. And I'm going to go back to Phil again, when we're not really sure about whether the market is ready for it, whether it makes sense
I
to
just
think
asked
to get into it.
why spend public money on it? There's a great case to be made, developing real estate and having that get, and the private sector could fund that. That's something that's totally realistic. And then we could get to that market as opposed to digging into our tax dollars.
Well, there you go. I think you've got the last word there. We'll see what happens. Stay tuned for parting shots.